Right, afternoon, guys. This is a PowerPoint presentation on traction devices, obviously to support the demonstration we did the other evening. Okay, so today we're going to talk about traction devices. The aim of this presentation, obviously, or this session, is to understand what a traction device is, the many types, select the correct traction device for the equine's needs, and also use or correctly use the traction device in relation to the equine's needs. So there's many different types of traction device, and obviously we've got to choose the right one and use that correctly. So when we go back to last block and we learned about the reasons for shoeing, obviously the second main reason for shoeing horses is for grip. Okay, grip is traction. Okay, quick definition of the word traction. Traction can be defined as a physical process which tangible force is transmitted across an interface between two bodies through dry friction or an intervening fluid film resulting in motion, stoppage or transmission of power. Obviously, that's an engineering definition or scientific definition between the two. For us, traction means where the ground surface of the foot hits the ground surface and how it reacts with that ground surface. I hear a lot of people talk about traction, slip, and its reaction to concussion. Obviously, when we look at the normal horse moving, there is always in its stride, in the landing phase, a certain amount of slip. The slip is really, really important to help suppress concussion. So all horses need a certain amount of slip. Not so much that they fall over, but a certain small amount of slip in that foot landing. If we increase the grip to the point that foot stops dead, then that's a bit like, you slowly falling face first onto the ground. There's going to be no impact. Whereas if you fall flat on your face into the ground, you will break your nose. And it, again, is a bit like hitting a brick wall in a car. The faster you go, the more damage you're going to do. And it's a bit like if we overstud or put too many traction devices in the shoe, so that foot stops dead on the ground, all that impact force is just going to jar all the way up the limb and affect all the structures above it. So the first traction device we're going to talk about is the shoe itself. Okay. Now, there's many different types of shoes. Obviously, we're going to talk about just normal, flat shoes with no raised heels on. Okay, so we've got two types of shoe you can see in the pictures. We've got a concave shoe, we've got a flat shoe. When we look at these pictures, the first thing we notice is the Farriery groove is packed full of debris. Most times when we go to reshoe a horse, we take the shoe off. If it's not completely worn down, we will find debris in that groove. Now, when we obviously discuss in orals about, the use of concave, the reasons for fullering, etc., people always comment on, the groove, the fullering is there for grip. And when I ask the question, how does that provide grip? No one knows the answer. The reason fullering provides grip is because that groove, that channel, fills with soft debris. Now, metal on surface tends to slip. So if it's a plain stamp shoe, it would slip. If we put an empty groove on the shoe, it will still probably slip. Whereas if that groove fills with surface, dirt, whatever, gravel, that all of a sudden will provide more grip. So it's not the groove, it's what's in the groove. Okay, so let's look at the whole shoe as a traction device. Obviously, it depends on the style of shoe. We've got two main differentials there. We've got flat shoes, we've got concave shoes. The fact the shoe is concave itself isn't designed to provide extra grip. Okay, the concave border was all about self-cleaning and reducing weight. However, because the ground bearing surface of that shoe has now got a smaller bearing surface because they're concave, that will produce less slip. That will cause, but that will allow that surface area of that shoe to embed into the surface and be a little bit more grippy. Okay, so, and also you speak to clients now about the horse slipping. It never slips in the first couple of weeks after it's been shod. That's because when we shoe the horses, there's sharp edges on the shoe. It's a stronger shoe. As the horse wears and comfort wears the shoe, it's more likely to slip. And again, the more the shoe's worn out flat, the more like a razor blade it is, the more it's going to slip. And again, the other important factor in all this is what material it's made out of. We'll talk about materials in a bit, because the material we make the shoe out of has a big influence on how much grip the shoe itself promotes. So four main materials here. We have obviously the barefoot, the unshod horse. So we're talking horn on the ground, okay? Steel, aluminium, plastic and rubber. I've said before, I was part of a study group, some scientists doing a study on this years ago, back when I was an apprentice, and he looked at all four of these and put some sensors on the feet to measure the amounts of slippage and also the amount of concussive forces traveling up the limb. Barefoot, obviously the foot's functioning, there's nothing impeding on the natural function of the foot, and the horn is relatively soft. There was a small amount of slippage, but the amount of concussive forces passing up the limb was relatively small. With the steel shoe, although there was more concussive forces moving up the limb, the slip counteracted that to a degree. So there was more concussive force with the steel shoe, and there was a lot more slippage, but it wasn't off the chart compared with the unshod foot. Aluminium is a lot softer, especially on a hard surface, will dig in, okay, because it's softer, it will bind into the tarmac surface, and it will cause a lot less slippage, but a lot more jarring. And the rubber and plastic shoes on a hard surface were completely off the chart, because they're that soft and rubberized. I mean, you can do it yourself. You can get your whatever shoe you're wearing with a plastic or rubber sole on it, drag it on some concrete or tarmac. You'll physically feel it juddering, and that's traction, okay, causing jarring. So obviously the plastics and the rubber, when they land, they stop still. They like stick to the road. They don't slide, okay? Obviously, the ground the horse is working on has different types of properties. Obviously, we've got the hard surfaces such as roads and tracks, mainly man-made. And then we've got the soft surfaces. Soft like turf. I mean, that was the original one where all the hunters and competition horses worked on. And now we've got all these softer arena surfaces as well. And again, depending on what product, what type of arena surface you have, or the horse is being worked on, depends again on some of the attractional forces going up through the limb. And again, in this country especially, there's a difference between how some arena surfaces ride in the summer to how they are in the winter. They're very wet in the winter and probably do run at their best, whereas in the summer, some of these sand arenas and stuff get very, very deep, and the going gets very, very deep, and the feet are sinking into them a lot deeper. So let's talk about some of these traction devices then. Okay, traditionally, and again, we'll see all these different shoes. You'll see them at competitions. You'll see them all over Facebook. Some are put on for show. Some are put on for competitions. But a lot of these shoes don't get used for their actual intended function from back in the day. A lot of these shoes predate screw-in studs, tungsten pins, stuff like that. And in fact, when we look at shoes like the Colk and Wedge, double corkins, and Scotch Hills draft shoes, they actually predate normal tarmac roads. These are all back in the day, certainly with the Colkins and the Wedges, they were all around the time when we still had cobbled roads. And the reason the Scotch Hill, as we call them, the draft shoes, have got that style of hill was because they didn't have cobbles up in Scotland. They used to have road stones, which are more like a rectangular rounded stone. And the idea of their hills was they slotted between them stones, whereas because we had cobbles, obviously you needed something to lock in between the cobbles, and that's what the Colkin did. The main reason that instead of having double corkins on these shoes, we had cork and wedges was on the big, slow-moving draft horses, we had double corkins to give maximum grip. But on some of the other horses, carriage-pulling horses, faster-moving horses, we put a cork and wedge on. And the reason we put the wedge on, because it's a lot safer. The horses with double corkins weren't moving at a fast enough pace to actually interfere themselves. I mean, you imagine the sharp edge of a corkin on the inside of a foot digging into the fatlock of the opposing leg. It's going to make quite a mess. Whereas with a wedge, you can fit the shoe up, put a sloping edge on it, and you're not going to interfere. These were the horses obviously working on the roads, be it cobbled or Scotch roadstone. And then we had the hunters. Hunters used to have a Colk and wedge on as well. Sometimes you'll see pictures of the old school hunter corkins, and you'll notice that the colkin, the face of the colkin, is in line with the section of the actual section of the shoe. This is because that colkin it didn't need to be square to the toe. It was moving on the soft surface. And if you think of it, if it's square to the section, the inside front corner of it is going to act as a land anchor, if you like, going into the surface and then gradually coming to a halt, as opposed to digging in and just stopping dead. You know, these shoes were used for hunters. And again, back then, these were hind shoes. There wasn't a version of the Colk and wedge for the front foot. Okay? You know, that's something really important to remember. Certainly these fast-moving horses working on the soft. Obviously, the modern way of dealing with this is the stud. Just going back a second, one thing I'd just like to point out with the old traditional methods is once that shoe was nailed on, that was it. You know, you've raised the heels, you've altered the angle of the foot, and that's going to stay on for the remainder of the shoeing cycle. You lifted the heels up, you've changed everything. Obviously, that's then a constant. You can't just simply unscrew them. So obviously, moving on to studs, the modern way of doing this is a lot better. You can change the shape and size of the stud to suit the ground you're going on. And when that horse isn't doing that job, which when you look at the horses 24 hours a day, it's only a very small proportion of that 6-week shoeing cycle where that stud's actually needed. Or we can just unscrew them and take them out. We only put them in when we go to the competition. And again, with the nature of the roads now, you know, these screw-in studs, these are only for horses working on soft ground. So again, we've got our different sizes of studs, just as a quick sort of rough guide, okay? Although they're called road studs, they're not technically designed for using on the road, okay? But these are the smaller studs. We use these on hard ground, okay? Sometimes we use them on the inside. If we put 2 stud holes in, we tend to use a smaller stud on the inside sometimes, especially if we've got a close action. Because again, if we put 2 massive studs inside and outside, if that horse does interfere, we're going to cause a bit of a mess. It's quite a severe injury. And then we've got the large road stud used in the horse's front shoes. as a pair on good hard going. A lot of people think that studs are to be used when the ground conditions are wet and soft and slippery. Actually, you'll find, especially if you ride horses yourself on the turf, you're more likely to slip when the ground's hard. Okay, if you think about modern times when we're out hunting, normally, you know, the ground them horses are working on is normally about fetlock deep at least. Well, if that hoof has sunk into the ground, it's not going anywhere anyway. Okay, so a little protrusion on the shoe isn't going to make much difference. Again, was the small pointy ones. They're generally used on good going or when the grass is long, okay, and the road studs don't cut through enough, okay. And again, a lot of studs I tend to see and people I speak to are about rider confidence. I mean, if you are eventing at a high level and the jumps are big and you're covering a lot of ground at speed, then you know you're more likely to, you know, and it's not just about the size of the jumps, it's about the turns and the angles you're going into the jumps at. So you need real good strong footing. If you're just going for a bit of a gallop across your local field or down your local bridle path, or you know, you're even just jumping a few small fences, studs are not really necessary. You know, they're a necessary evil when you need extra grip. You know, we'll talk about it towards the end, but you know, the long-term effects of using studs and having too much grip can do a lot of damage to the horse. So what are the advantages of using studs? Obviously, they help reduce the risk of the horse slipping and falling. You know, I've seen it time and time again. I've also been on a few horses myself where it's happened, where you're at a competition and you're just getting a bit, you know, you're up against the clock and you try to cut a few corners and the horse back end goes out from underneath itself. Next minute, you're sort of picking yourself off the grass. They will give the horse confidence when jumping. However, there's a negative to that, and I've seen this myself as well, where people have never used studs before and they go to a show and they decide they're going to put studs in because I've got stud holes and I'm going to use them. And the horse is just like, what's going on? This doesn't feel right. So the horse has got to be used to it. I mean, if you're going schooling on the grass or you're going to cross-country schooling, always put studs in. Try and get that horse used to it. Obviously, when I said about rider confidence, if the rider's confident that the horse isn't going to slip, then the rider will be able to ride a lot more positively. Obviously, you know, engaging their leg, get the horse carry on moving forward. Sometimes when they're worried about slipping, you know, they take the leg off the horse automatically think, oh, what's going on here? And then switches off. So there's loads of disadvantages to studs. Like I say, necessary evil. It's like horseshoeing itself. Okay. There's a lot of debate over whether to have one stud or two studs. Hurling and polo rules in the regulations for polo, you are only allowed one stud, and it's got to be in a specific place as well. And you know, that's sort of like that rule tends to be used all over the world, and there's a reason for that. If you were because of the pace of polo and the fact they're very agile and they do lots of spinning around and very tight turns, if you have two studs in, then you're not going to allow that limb to pivot. The horse needs to be able to pivot if it's going to do a tight turn. If you lock that foot on the ground, the horse will still pivot, but the foot's not going to move. That's when you start doing tearing of the ligaments and other damages. And as bad as you can cause spiral fractures. Okay, so that's you know, so you've got the debate of one stud, two studs. Some people like to have two studs because then they feel the foot itself's a lot more balanced. My argument to that is, well, if it's on the hard surface, that's only going to make a difference on a really hard surface. And if it's a really hard surface, like a road or back of a horse box, it shouldn't even have the studs in. Okay, but sometimes you've got to get from the box part to the start line. So you know, a bit of a contentious subject. You know, like I say, using too big a studs or the wrong stud, you know, you're not going to get the desired effect. You will cause point loading over a period of time. And, you know, the key thing here is too much traction will result in concussion and jarring. So you've just got to use the correct number for the job you're doing. And it's horses for courses, you know, for a entry level event horse, you know, go around 80 centimetre courses, 90 centimetre courses, you don't need a lot of studs. You know, I know a lot of professional riders, if they're taking young horses around circuits like that, they don't put any studs in. You know, they don't start to put studs in until they get sort of pre-novice, novice level, because, you know, they don't need it. They know the horse is all right and they're going to ride positive. Okay. Using studs on arena surfaces, I mean, this is something some show jumpers do, but a stud has no bearing on traction on an arena surface. You know, to make it make any difference, they've got to be massive, great big studs, and there's just never any need for that. You know, the idea of an arena surface is that the foot and the shoe will sink into the arena surface, and that the whole foot then becomes the stud, you know. 1 versus 2 then. So 1 stud hole was a lot less grip than having 2, but 1 will allow for the foot to twist. Okay. You're less likely to have an interference injury. It will leave the foot unbalanced on a firmer surface. I mean, you get some people and they decide to screw their studs in when they're at home before they go to a competition. I've seen that a lot. And that's just not good, because the horse, although the horse box may have a rubberized floor, you know, it's still a firm surface, and that horse is going to be trying to balance itself in the back of a horse box whilst with studs. And that's altering the angle of the foot and the balance of the foot. So, you know, there's no need to do that. You should always put the studs in once you get it off the horse box. Obviously with 2, we've got a little bit more grip because we've got twice the amount of studs. This can cause more jarring and doesn't allow the limb to twist. Obviously, the more stud holes you have put on your horse, the more us, the farrier, are going to charge for them. I mean, some farriers charge more than others for stud holes. Some don't, they just put them in. But most farriers do charge. I think throughout my whole career, I don't think that's the one constant. I've never put my price for stud holes up. It's always been 125. So if you have 4, that's 5. I don't like messing around with change. Obviously, if you have 8, that then doubles up to 10. So, you know, so again, if they're not particularly well off and they don't use the studs, rather than just having 8 put in, just 1 in each foot will do. Obviously, the advantage of the 2, if the horse is on a firmer surface, there is more balance. Me personally, when I used to compete myself on the grass, I would always put one in the outside of the front shoe. I've never put 4 in the front foot, and I used to just put 2 stud holes in the shoe of the hind shoe. To be honest with you, I only ever really normally put 1 in the outside. It was very rare that I'd put a stud on the inside. But that's just personal preference. Again, one of the good things about having 8 stud holes in the horse is, you know, it's down to the rider then. They can put them where they want, when they want, and what size they want, you know. Okay, it's just options. Obviously, the actual positioning of the stud hole is very, very important. Some people say it should go as far back as you can get it. Obviously, if it goes too far forward, you'll start causing a rocker effect and really affecting the way the horse moves, which isn't good. I know science, I mean, again, that's just people's opinion, but obviously opinions need backing up with science, and some scientific research has been done over the last sort of like 10, 20 years. And from all that, the best place for the stud to go is technically halfway between the heel of the shoe and the last nail hole. That is the most effective place for that stud, and it's the same with road pins as well, but we'll talk about that in a bit. But it's the most effective place for that to be with the least amount of negative effect. I know a lot of people, and you can buy shoes where the stud holes are a lot further back. And I do believe the polo rules say that stud hole needs to be 5/8 forward of the heel of the shoe. The only problem with that, when you start putting the stud hole that far back, is on the ground surface, sorry, the foot surface of the shoe, there is obviously the other side of the hole. And what I always found, if they were too far back, that is just right at the point where the heel of the hoof sits. And because the heel bears more weight than any other part of the foot, that would start to prolapse down into the hole. And I'd always end up with slightly deformed heels or more collapsed heels. Okay, because that heel itself hasn't got enough flat steel to sit on. So moving them forward seems to do a lot less damage to the foot and is a lot more effective. Just lastly, we just talk a bit about traction on roads. Okay, there's 4 different types of thing we will use. Standard one really are road pins. Okay, a road pin, if we look at this diagram here, it's basically a 4mm tungsten pin, and all you do is you drill a hole, and we spoke about this in the demo last night. You drill a hole on the inside border, and with a copper hammer, because you don't want to damage, because these are very tough and you will damage your other tools or your anvil. Either have a copper plate or a copper hammer, and you just rivet them into place. They sit quite snugly. The actual pin itself is cone shaped, so it will fill that hole and sit in there tight. The other way of doing it is with road nails. Road nail is the normal horseshoe nail with a tungsten pin set into the head of the nail. The only downside to using road nails, if you drive it with your nailing on hammer, you're going to damage the nailing on hammer. And the other thing, if you're going to use them, and again, like I said, the ideal position for this is halfway between the heel nail of the shoe and the actual heel of the shoe. A lot of farriers will just simply drive that up into the heel nail of the shoe, which it's not its optimum place, and you are going to cause that rocker kind of motion because it's going to be prominent as the shoe wears. You'll end up rocking the shoe backwards and forwards if you're not careful. If you're going to use road nails, what you need to do is have a stamp and a britchel with you and just bang in an extra nail hole at that halfway point, and then not drive the nail up into the hoof. Just what I do is I put the nail into the nail hole, snip the back off, and I just rivet the nail in place. The only downside to using road nails is obviously now the steel used to make the nails are quite soft, and sometimes if the horse doing a lot of road work, sometimes that pin can just get ripped straight out that nail head. Okay, so only quite a small pin, and the nail head's quite small itself. So I'll always go for the actual tungsten road pins and just drill the hole and set it into the shoe, because that's, as long as your drill bits are right size, that's not going anywhere. Lastly, on the pins is we have road plugs. Basically, what a road plug is, people don't tend to use them as much now because most people are drilling them in, and all a road plug was like a untapped stud, which you would just drive into a stud hole, which was made slightly tapered, and that was another way of getting that tungsten pin held into a shoe. Used to use them a lot on army horses when I first started, but it was always quite a pain to set it up because that hole had to be exactly the right shape and size for that plug to go into. The drilled in tungsten pins were a lot more effective and a lot more efficient. Lastly, we've got bohrium. Bohrium's a compound which you kind of weld either onto the toe or at the heels of the shoe. Okay, and this is a very, very hard or granular compound which sticks to the shoe and basically causes grip. It's just like And as you can see in the top picture, it doesn't look pretty and can be very, very, very abrasive and cause a lot of traction if you want it, but some might say too much, okay? Used mainly in the toe of horses when they are heavy wearers, because not only will it give it the extra traction, it will protect the toe from overwearing. But again, you need to have like the proper welding kit to actually get that into the shoe. And again, it's not something I've used for a very, very long time since I was in the army, to be honest. All right, just to summarise then, obviously important facts when it comes to using traction device. Obviously, correct selection of the correct device is important. I mean, there's no point putting a road nail in a horse when a horse is working on the soft ground, because it's going to provide no grip. Likewise, there's no point using screwing studs for horses working on the roads, okay, because the damage you're going to do because of the changing of the balance, and it's just not the right thing to design for that job. However, again, you know, us as farriers, one of our professional responsibilities when we're talking to horse owners is to educate them, to make sure that they don't over studs, making sure that they know how to maintain the stud holes. So obviously they're great when we shoe and the stud fits, but if they don't maintain that stud hole and the thread in it, you know, as the shoeing cycle goes through, if they're competing week 5 of that 6-week shoeing cycle, that stud's not going to work unless they know how to maintain it. So that's the responsibility of us to help teach them how to do that. And again, it's important to realise the negative effects of too much traction, over studding, putting too many traction devices. I mean, just a quick anecdotal thing for you. I mean, I remember going over to the Middle East, and there's a guy who's got a horse. It was a very well-bred carriage driving horse. It was a nice stallion. It was only 5 years old. And over there, because of the terrain, and they do Yahoo it a lot down roads, it's a bit of a sports car thing, but with horses. All the horses over there, they'd got a road pin in both heels and 2 in the toe as well to give maximum grip. And I had a long conversation with him about the negative effects of that, and he was like, yeah, well, it's the only thing that will give us enough grip. And like, fair enough. Well, this horse, when we went to shoe it, you could hardly, it was so jarred up and its joints were already at the age of 5. And yeah, and this was a well-conformed horse, you know, that shot, it was struggling to bend its legs then, you know, because of all this constant jarring going up a limb. So that's the negative effects for over traction. Obviously, if there's any questions, obviously we're going to put this on Facebook group just for you to watch at your own time. But if there are any questions, just pop them in the comments below, and we'll get back to you. But you know, the main point of this presentation was just to confirm and just go through a few pointers from last night's demo.